They said my sister owed a few $100 in HOA fines, so they showed up at our driveway with a taser. She begged them to stop, but the HOA officer just smiled. Then, the moment that taser cracked through the air, everything changed, because they had no idea who they were messing with. Hey everyone, welcome back to HOA Stories. I'm Jake. I live in a small gated community just outside Phoenix. And trust me, our HOA makes the devil look polite. But what happened last month, when my sister got involved, was on a whole different level. If you've ever hated HOAs or been bullied by one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a BOOO HOA in the comments. Share this story with your friends who've ever dealt with HOA nightmares, because this one gets wild. I still remember that afternoon like a bad dream, the kind that starts slow and then suddenly flips into chaos. It was one of those perfect Arizona Sundays. Sun bright enough to bleach the driveway. Wind quiet enough that you could hear the neighbor's sprinklers ticking in rhythm. My sister, Sophie, had just parked her car outside my house. She was carrying a tray of coffees, laughing, telling me about some client who tried to sue his own cat for scratching his Tesla. She's that kind of person. Sharp tongue, even sharper mind, and the kind of confidence that makes HOA board members twitch. But that day, none of that mattered, because by the time the coffee cooled, she was lying on the ground, stunned, while an HOA officer stood over her with a taser in hand. It started earlier that morning. I'd received yet another one of those ridiculous HOA violation letters. The fifth one this month. This time it wasn't about my fence color, or the garbage bins, or the unauthorized garden gnome Sophie bought me for Christmas. This time it was about late fees. They said I hadn't paid 2 reminder charges from a fine issued last summer. The fine itself? For parking slightly crooked on the curb during a storm. I called, emailed, even dropped by the HOA office, no answer. Just automated responses and robotic, please comply with the board's decision letters. But that Sunday, they came in person. 2 HOA officers. Dark uniforms. Body cams flashing that little red light, like they were walking into a crime scene. Sophie was with me on the front porch when they arrived. The taller one, a woman with a cold grin, said, "Sir, we're here to enforce Property Code 4C, unpaid dues. You've been notified." Sophie raised an eyebrow. Unpaid dues? You mean that fake fine about the mailbox angle? The officer didn't like that tone. She glanced down at her little clipboard and said, "Ma'am, please step aside. This doesn't concern you. Big mistake." Sophie crossed her arms, leaned forward slightly, and said, "Oh, it concerns me. I wrote the law they're pretending to enforce." I could almost hear the air change. The HOA officer stiffened. Her partner shifted his weight. And I knew right then, this was going to spiral. The shouting started small. "Ma'am, we'll call law enforcement." "Go ahead. I'll represent them too." That kind of small-town power argument. One side fueled by a badge and fake authority. The other fueled by caffeine and a law degree. The neighbors began peeking through curtains. Phones came out. I saw Mrs. Bell from next door whispering into her phone, probably streaming it to the HOA Facebook page. Then it happened so fast. The officer reached for her taser. Sophie stepped back, shocked. "Are you seriously?" Crack. The sound of that taser tore through the quiet neighborhood. Sophie dropped her coffee. Her knees hit the pavement. Everything froze. The HOA officer just stood there, calm, satisfied, like she'd finally won a long, stupid game. I ran to Sophie. Her body was shaking, her breathing uneven. "Call 911. I yelled at the other officer, but he just stood there, muttering into his radio like it was routine. Then Sophie groaned, and her voice, low but steady, said something I'll never forget. She looked straight up at the woman who'd tossed her and said, "You just assaulted an attorney representing the state bar." The HOA officer blinked. Her face drained of color. She looked like someone had just unplugged her entire sense of power. Because in that one line, Sophie flipped the game. The cops arrived within minutes. Turns out, Sophie had already been representing a client suing the same HOA for misconduct. And her body cam, the tiny one clipped on her handbag, had caught the entire scene. Every shout, every threat, every second of abuse. The officers froze when she showed them her credentials. Within moments, the taser wielder's expression went from proud to terrified. One of the cops muttered under his breath, "Ma'am, we're gonna need you to hand over that weapon." I stood there, still trying to process everything. My heart pounding. The smell of burnt pavement and coffee still hanging in the air. Sophie slowly sat up, fixed her hair, and said with a half-smile, "Jake, record everything. This HOA just wrote their own legal obituary." The next few hours were chaos. Ambulance, police reports, HOA board members suddenly out of town. Every neighbor pretending they hadn't just filmed the entire scene from behind blinds. But the best part? Sophie didn't even press charges right away. She just smiled that lawyer smile, the kind that says revenge is paperwork, not passion. She said, "No, Jake, we'll handle this properly. They like rules? Let's bury them in their own rules." And that's when I realized something. The HOA had no clue who they'd messed with. They thought they were bullying another homeowner, but they'd just electrocuted a lawyer who teaches state-level property law. Yeah, Karma was about to hold a press conference. That night, as Sophie rested on my couch, I scrolled through social media. The video of her being tossed had already hit 60,000 views. Caption: HOA goes rogue. Tases homeowner's sister over unpaid fine. The comments were insane. Half the people furious. Half just saying BOOO HOA over and over again. And one comment stood out. "Wait till they find out who she is." Oh, trust me, they were about to. So tell me, if your HOA ever tried something this insane, would you fight back? Or would you let karma do the talking? Backhand index pointing down. Type it in the comments. I'm curious who's got the guts to stand up to these petty tyrants. The next morning, our whole neighborhood buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Every front porch conversation started with one name, Sophie. Some whispered it with fear, some with excitement. But the HOA board? They were silent. And that silence said panic. I saw it in their eyes when I drove by the community office. Their blinds were half shut, their open sign flipped backward, and their cars gone. That's when Sophie looked at me from the passenger seat and said, "Jake, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for education." I almost laughed. Education? Soph. She tossed you. She sipped her coffee, adjusted her sunglasses, and said, "Exactly. Time to teach them how the law actually works." By noon, the internet had already chosen its side. The video of the taser incident was now over 400,000 views. News blogs picked it up. Headlines like, "HOA officer tases woman over late fees. Gets shock of her life." Even our local radio station mentioned it. Meanwhile, the HOA released a tiny statement on Facebook. One paragraph, full of, "We take community safety seriously," and "pending investigation," but no apology, no admission, just bureaucratic fog. That's when Sophie snapped her laptop shut and said, "All right, they want legal fog? Let's bring the thunderstorm." She started digging. Not emotionally, strategically. She pulled up the HOA's own bylaws, their recorded fines, their chain of communication. Within an hour, she found 6 violations. Not by homeowners, by the board themselves. Things like misallocated maintenance funds, improper authorization of penalties, unauthorized access to resident property. All documented, all time-stamped, and I swear I could feel the temperature drop in the room when she whispered, "They've been breaking their own rules for years." That evening, we walked to the community park. You could feel the shift. People who used to smile politely at the board members now looked away. Neighbors whispered things like, "She's the lawyer, right? And did she really sue them already?" Sophie just smiled, calm as ever. She had that quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to shout. We sat on a bench near the fountain. She pulled out her notepad and said, "Tomorrow I'm sending them a letter. Not a lawsuit. A warning. I raised an eyebrow. A warning. She nodded. Lawyers don't attack first. We give them the chance to dig their own grave. The next day, she drafted the most perfectly terrifying letter I'd ever seen. Professional tone, legal precision, and just enough sarcasm to sting. It began with, "Dear board members, I appreciate your enthusiasm for community order. However, the use of electroshock weapons to enforce unpaid late fees violates not only basic ethics but several state statutes." By the time she got to the closing line, "Consider this your friendly reminder that law applies to everyone, even you." My jaw was on the floor. She signed it with her full title, Sophie Allen, ESQ State Bar Certified Attorney at Law, and faxed it directly to their office. Old school. Intentional. Because she wanted that paper trail. For the next 2 days it was radio silence. Not a peep from the HOA. No patrol cars. No fines. Not even those stupid passive-aggressive newsletter emails. Until Friday evening. Doorbell rings. Standing there was the HOA president herself, Mrs. Beverly Harkins. A woman with the permanent expression of someone smelling expired milk. Tight bun. Tighter smile. "Good evening," she said sweetly. "I just wanted to personally apologize for the misunderstanding." Sophie didn't even stand up. She looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Beverly, tossing someone isn't a misunderstanding. It's a felony." The smile cracked. Just a little. Enough for the truth to peek through. Then Beverly said something that changed everything. "Well, we could make this all go away quietly, Ms. Allen, if you'd like." Sophie tilted her head. "Are you offering me a bribe, Beverly?" The silence that followed was pure gold. I wanted to record it, frame it, play it at every HOA meeting forever. Beverly stammered, I'm just saying we could handle this internally." Sophie smiled faintly. "Oh, we will. But not the way you're hoping." And then she closed the door. Later that night, Sophie called one of her old colleagues, a local reporter who specialized in legal misconduct stories. By the next morning, her story was on every local news channel. The HOA office was surrounded by cameras. The board members were suddenly unavailable for comment. And that smug officer who pulled the trigger? Suspended pending investigation. The internet loved it. Clips, memes, reaction videos everywhere. Sophie didn't bask in it. She stayed calm. But I saw it in her eyes. That quiet sense of justice finally tilting in her favor. Then came the email. Subject line, "Urgent. HOA legal notice." I opened it. And there it was. The board had filed a complaint against us for defamation and harassment. Couldn't believe it. They were doubling down. Even after everything. Sophie just chuckled. "They're really gonna make me do it, huh?" I asked. "Do what?" She smiled. "End their little empire." That night, she began drafting the full lawsuit. Claims of excessive force, civil rights violations, emotional distress. But she added something else too. A public transparency demand. She wanted all the HOA's financial records opened for public review. I didn't know much about law, but even I knew that was a death sentence for a corrupt board. And as she typed, she muttered something under her breath. "They think this is about a taser. They have no idea this is about power." By midnight, the document was ready. 20 pages. Clean. Deadly. She looked at me and said, "Jake, tomorrow, the HOA learns what accountability feels like." And I swear, that moment right there, it didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like balance. The next morning, I walked outside. The neighborhood felt different. People waved, smiled. Some even clapped. Turns out, the residents had been waiting years for someone to stand up to the board. Sophie had become a quiet legend overnight. She didn't care about fame. She just cared about fairness. But me, I was proud. Proud that my sister had done what the rest of us only dreamed about. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning, because the HOA wasn't done yet, and neither was she. So tell me, if someone like Sophie stood up to your HOA, would you back her up? Or stay silent like the rest of the neighborhood? Drop your answer below, backhand index pointing down. The morning after we filed the lawsuit, everything felt too quiet. No HOA trucks. No board members driving around pretending to inspect lawns. No emails, no letters, nothing. That's when Sophie looked at me and said, "Calm before the storm, Jake. They're regrouping." She was right, because by noon, the storm hit. A white SUV pulled up outside my house. 2 people in suits stepped out. 1 man, 1 woman. They looked like corporate mannequins. Perfect posture, fake smiles, and clipboards made of pure arrogance. "Mr. Allen?" the man asked. I nodded. "We're here on behalf of the HOA Legal Committee. You've been served." He handed me a thick envelope. I opened it right there on the porch. Counter lawsuit. Apparently, they were suing me for defamation, trespassing, and emotional distress. I almost laughed. Trespassing? On my own property. Sophie walked out, sipping her coffee like she'd been expecting it. She looked at the papers and smiled. "Cute," she said. "They copied this straight off Google." The woman from the SUV frowned. "Ma'am, this is a serious matter." Sophie's tone stayed calm. So was the taser. That shut her up. After they left, I stared at Sophie. "Now what?" She shrugged. "Now we do what they don't expect. Stay quiet, stay smart, and let them bury themselves in their own stupidity." And just like that, she went back to her laptop, typing away like nothing had happened. A few days later, the HOA called for an emergency board meeting. Of course, it wasn't open to residents. No, it was restricted attendance. But thanks to Sophie's little circle of friends, we got a copy of the agenda. Item number 3. Discussion. Public image management and legal counterstrategy against viral lawsuit. Item number 4. Suspension of HOA officer privileges pending review. I grinned. "They're panicking," I said. Sophie nodded. "And they should, because public opinion is the one thing they can't find." That night, we started getting messages. Emails from other homeowners. Stories from people who had been fined for absurd reasons. One guy said he got a $500 ticket because his mailbox wasn't vibrant enough. Another was told her garden hose violated color harmony standards. It was insane, and it gave Sophie ammunition. She started compiling them, line by line, evidence by evidence. "This," she said, pointing at her screen, "is a pattern of abuse. They don't enforce rules, they weaponize them." 3 days later, the HOA president, Beverly, finally resurfaced. She showed up on local TV, all makeup and pearls, sitting stiff in a studio chair. The anchor asked, "Did your officer really tase a resident's sister over unpaid fines?" Beverly smiled that fake politician smile. "The incident is under review. Our goal is community harmony." Sophie watched it, unimpressed. "Community harmony?" she muttered. "You fried me like a pancake on asphalt." Then she opened her laptop and began typing an open letter, addressed to every resident in the subdivision. She wrote, "If harmony means silence, then justice means noise. And it's time we made some." She hit post. Within hours, the HOA's Facebook page was flooded. Residents demanding answers, asking for financial transparency, requesting Beverly's resignation. The comment section turned into a battlefield. And every time someone posted, "BOOO HOA," I couldn't help but grin. Then came the visit I didn't expect. Around sunset, I saw headlights stop in front of the house. It was the officer, the one who'd tossed Sophie. She looked different, exhausted, hair tied back, no uniform, no badge. She walked up slowly. "I came to apologize," she said, voice trembling. Sophie didn't say a word, just stared at her. The woman continued, "I didn't know who you were. They told me you were resisting. I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought I was doing my job." For a moment, Sophie's face softened. Then she said quietly, "You were doing their job, not yours." The woman nodded, and then whispered something I didn't expect. "You were right about them. They make us do things that aren't legal. They falsify reports." Sophie leaned forward. Can you prove it? The woman hesitated, then nodded. That was it. The game had changed again. That night, Sophie stayed up till 3 a.m., going through recordings, emails, and the officer's statement. By dawn, she had a case strong enough to not just defend us, but expose them. This isn't a lawsuit anymore, she said. This is going to be a scandal. The next week was pure chaos. News outlets camped near the subdivision. Reporters knocking on doors. Board members vanishing from social media. The HOA's attorney resigned mid-case. And word spread fast. Sophie had subpoenaed the HOA's financial records. Every penny, every transaction, every bonus payment. When I asked why, she said, because corruption leaves receipts. Then one morning we got a letter in the mail. This time not a threat. A petition. Over 100 signatures from residents. They wanted to dissolve the entire HOA. I looked at Sophie, stunned. Wait, you can do that? She smirked. Legally? Oh, absolutely. They built their kingdom on bylaws. I'm just turning their laws against them. 2 days later, we held a public meeting in the park. Dozens of neighbors showed up. Some angry, some scared, all fed up. Sophie stood at the front with her usual calm power. No microphone, just her voice and her presence. She told them the truth. The misuse of funds, the fake fines, the falsified reports. And then she said, you have the right to live in peace. You pay for safety, not fear. And no board, no matter how fancy their title, has the right to control you. The crowd erupted. People cheering, clapping, shouting, "End the HOA." And right there, under the golden evening sun, I realized Sophie wasn't just fighting her own battle anymore. She was leading a movement. But I knew it wasn't over, because power doesn't give up quietly. And that smug look in Beverly's eyes on the TV screen told me she had something else planned. I just didn't know what. Yet, if you were in that park, standing with Sophie against the HOA, would you sign that petition? Or stay out of it to avoid trouble? Tell me in the comments. For a few days, everything felt calm again. The air in the neighborhood was lighter. No patrols. No warning letters. Even the HOA's official Facebook page went silent. People were finally starting to smile again. Mowing their lawns without worrying about grass height violations. Sophie looked at peace for the first time in weeks. But peace never lasts long in places like this. Because just when we thought we'd won, Beverly came back. Started small. Rumors. A whisper here, a text there. Did you hear Sophie's just trying to sue for money? She doesn't even live here full-time. She's trying to dissolve the HOA so she can sell the property. All lies. But Beverly knew what she was doing. She didn't fight in court. She fought in whispers. And the worst part? It was working. One evening, while I was grilling out back, our neighbor Greg walked over. Someone who had cheered at the meeting last week. He looked uneasy. Hey, Jake, he said slowly. I don't know what's true anymore, man. People are saying Sophie's using us. That she's... What was the word they used? Manipulating. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Greg, come on. You saw the taser video. He nodded, looking down. Yeah. But Beverly showed up this morning with some kind of paperwork. She said the HOA found undisclosed violations on your property. Things that could invalidate the case. My stomach twisted. Of course. Fake fines. Fake reports. Round 2. That night, Sophie sat at the dining table surrounded by stacks of printouts. Emails, photos, screenshots. All evidence of the HOA's retaliation. They're trying to make it look like we're the bad guys, she said, tapping her pen against the table. Classic smear campaign. I sat across from her, tired but trying to keep up. How do we fight that? She smiled faintly. We don't fight rumors. We expose the truth. The next morning, she drove to the courthouse alone. I offered to come, but she said, they're expecting you. Let them underestimate me. Hours later, she came back holding something heavy. A thick file, sealed and stamped. Freedom of Information Act request, she said. I got approval to access their financial logs. Every payment, every fine, every bonus, Beverly ever approved. She opened it on the table like a treasure chest of secrets. And inside was gold. Hundreds of entries labeled administrative adjustment. Thousands of dollars missing. Transfers to accounts under Beverly's husband's company. Sophie's eyes lit up. They thought I'd play defense. They were wrong. But before she could file, someone beat her to the next move. At 8 p.m., there was a knock on our door. 2 sheriff deputies. "Ma'am, sir, we have a court order," one said. They handed Sophie a notice, temporary restraining order, filed by the HOA against her. The accusation, harassment, unauthorized surveillance, and defamation. Sophie blinked. "They're accusing me of harassment? They tossed me." The officer just sighed. "Ma'am, we don't make the claims. We just deliver the order." After they left, Sophie paced the living room like a storm in heels. "This is Beverly's hand," she muttered. "She's scared and desperate." Then she stopped suddenly. "Wait!" She ran to her laptop, typing fast. "Jake, come here." She pointed at the HOA's internal meeting minutes, the ones leaked by one of the residents. There at the bottom was a line. "Motion to authorize surveillance on defendant for protective justification." I read it twice. "They're spying on us?" Sophie nodded. "And if I know Beverly, she didn't just stop at cameras." That night we checked around the house. Nothing obvious. But when Sophie opened the electric meter box on the sidewall, there it was, a small black device blinking red. A hidden mic. I felt my stomach drop. She looked furious, holding it up like a trophy. "Well," she said, "now we have real proof of harassment." She bagged it, labeled it, and added it to her growing collection of evidence. Her confidence was unshaken, but I could tell the weight was growing. 2 days later, Beverly made her move public. A press conference right at the subdivision entrance. She stood behind a podium, flanked by 2 board members, a local reporter, and a shiny new lawyer. Her speech was pure theater. "All we ever wanted was peace," she said, pretending to choke up. "But one resident has made it impossible. She's dividing our community." Sophie and I watched the live stream on my phone. Sophie didn't even blink. "She's overplaying," she said softly. "Wait till she realizes the cameras are on her now." Then Sophie clicked open a folder on her laptop titled HOA Evidence Dump. She uploaded every document, the financial logs, the emails, the secret microphone photo, to a shared drive, and sent the link to every single homeowner. It was over within an hour. By evening, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Screenshots flying everywhere. People cursing Beverly's name. Someone even posted a clip of Beverly's husband moving boxes from the HOA office that morning, labeled records. The next day, the subdivision entrance looked like a protest site. Signs that said, "Where's our money?" "No more Beverly," and "Justice for Sophie." Beverly tried to calm them down, but she couldn't hide anymore. The news picked it up. Headlines: HOA scandal erupts in suburban neighborhood. That night, Sophie sat beside me on the porch. The air smelled of rain and barbecue smoke. Neighbors honked as they drove by, waving, cheering her name. For once, she smiled. Not the lawyer smile, the real one. "You know," she said, "I used to think justice came from courtrooms, but it turns out it starts in driveways." I laughed softly. Guess Beverly learned that too. But peace is never permanent. Because the next morning, as we stepped outside to pick up the newspaper, we saw something painted across our garage door. Big, dripping red letters. "You'll pay for this." Sophie froze. The victory smile disappeared. And just like that, we knew Beverly's game wasn't over. If you woke up to that message on your garage, would you pack up and leave? Or stay and fight like Sophie did? The red paint dripped slowly down our garage door, like blood on concrete. It looked fresh, still wet, still reeking of cheap spray paint and hate. Sophie didn't say a word. She just stood there, staring, her jaw tight, her fists clenched at her sides. I could tell she wasn't scared. She was angry, and honestly, that scared me more than the message itself. We called the police. They took pictures, wrote notes, nodded politely, then left. No real concern. No follow-up promise. Just a "we'll look into it" that we both knew meant nothing. Sophie leaned against the car, shaking her head. "They're protecting her," she said quietly. "She's got friends on the inside. HOA money buys loyalty." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I did. Because Beverly always had that look of someone who'd never been told no in her life. That night, Sophie didn't sleep. I could hear her typing in the other room until dawn. The rhythm of the keyboard sounded like gunfire. When I walked in the next morning, she had 4 tabs open on her laptop, each showing different court filings, HOA statutes, and local ordinances. She looked up at me, exhausted but fierce. "I'm filing a harassment injunction," she said. "Not against Beverly, against the entire board." I blinked. "Can you even do that?" She smirked. "Watch me." By noon, she was in front of a judge. Calm, collected, every word precise like a blade. She presented the photos, the taser report, the microphone, the vandalism. And finally, the money trail. When she was done, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked stunned. He didn't rule right away, but he did say this: "Ms. Carter, if half of this is true, you have a serious case of organized misconduct on your hands." Sophie walked out of that courtroom like she just cracked open a secret code. But victory has a price. That evening, while we were sitting on the porch eating leftover pizza, we heard it. The low hum of an engine. Too slow to be casual. Too steady to be innocent. Headlights swept across our driveway, then stopped. A dark SUV idled at the curb. No plates visible. Just tinted windows. We both froze. Sophie whispered, "Stay inside." But before I could move, the SUV sped off, leaving behind a flutter of paper on the pavement. I picked one up. A single printout. A picture of Sophie. At the courthouse. Crossed out in red marker. That was the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. She said nothing for a long time. Just stared at the paper. Then finally, "They're not playing HOA anymore," she said. "This is personal." She locked every door, checked every camera, and installed 2 new ones before sunrise. The next day, a letter came in the mail. No return address. Just one line printed across the front. "You should have stayed quiet." Inside was a photo of our house, taken from the woods behind the fence. Sophie called the sheriff again. Same routine, same shrug. They told her it was probably a prank. But we both knew. Beverly had finally crossed the line. So Sophie did what she always did best. She turned the attack into evidence. She scanned everything, dated it, filed it, and sent copies to the local news reporter who had covered the HOA scandal earlier. "Let's see them laugh this off," she said. But that night, things escalated even further. It was just past midnight. We were both awake. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Then a sound outside. The soft crunch of gravel. Sophie looked at me. I grabbed the baseball bat from beside the door. We stepped out onto the porch. Nothing. Then I saw it. A faint flicker behind the bushes, like a reflection of glass. I moved closer, and found it. A hidden camera, pointed directly at our front door. I yanked it out of the dirt and held it up. "She's watching us," I muttered. Sophie's voice was cold. No, she was. The next morning, the HOA office was mysteriously closed. No one inside. No Beverly. No files. But Sophie had already sent her evidence to the district attorney's office the night before. And by that afternoon, things exploded. The news headline read, "Local HOA under investigation for fraud and harassment." Beverly's face flashed across every TV screen. Her perfect suburban smile now looked hollow, trapped, exposed. Neighbors we barely knew started coming by, thanking Sophie. Someone even left a thank you note on our porch with a homemade pie. For a moment, it felt like justice had won. But that feeling didn't last long. 2 nights later, We were jolted awake by the blaring sound of our alarm system. Glass shattering. A shadow in the hallway. I jumped up, heart racing, and saw movement in the kitchen. Sophie grabbed the phone. 911. Someone's in our house. By the time the police arrived, whoever it was had vanished. But the back door was open. The fence gate broken. And another message scrawled on the wall in red paint. This isn't over. The cops dusted for prints, nothing. They said maybe it was copycats. But Sophie wasn't buying that. She looked at the mess quietly, then at me, then back at the wall. And she whispered something that sent chills down my spine. They're scared, Jake. This is what scared people do before they fall. The next morning, she met with her contact at the DA's office. When she came back, she looked different, calm but intense. They're filing charges, she said. Fraud, embezzlement, illegal surveillance. Beverly's done. But then she paused. There's just one problem. I frowned. What? They can't find her. For 2 whole days, Beverly vanished. No one saw her. No one heard from her. Her husband claimed she'd gone on a retreat. But Sophie knew better. She's running, she said. And when cornered animals run, they get dangerous. That night, we double-locked everything again. And still, we barely slept. The next morning, Sophie stood by the window, sipping her coffee. Sunlight hit her face. Calm, focused, unbroken. She turned to me and said, "This isn't about HOA anymore, Jake. It's about power. People like Beverly don't quit until they're destroyed, or until someone makes them stop." I looked at her, the woman who'd been tossed, harassed, threatened, and somehow she still stood tall. That's when I realized. Sophie wasn't fighting to win anymore. She was fighting to end it. If your enemy disappeared after everything they did, would you breathe easy or get ready for their next move? Beverly was gone, but her shadow never left the neighborhood. It hung over us, like humidity before a storm. People started acting strange. Meetings canceled. Lawn inspections postponed. No more warning letters, but no one dared to smile either. It felt like the calm before something bad. And Sophie, she could feel it too. For the first time in months, she wasn't fighting. She was waiting. Waiting for Beverly to make her next move. Her confidence never wavered. But I could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. The long nights reading legal filings. The whispers outside our house. The sideways looks from neighbors who used to cheer for her. Winning comes with isolation. And Sophie was starting to feel it. Then one morning, she froze at her laptop. "Jake," she called, her voice sharp. I rushed over. There it was. An email. From Beverly_HOA@suburbancouncil.org. Subject: Let's talk. No body text. Just a single attachment. A video file. Sophie hesitated, then clicked it. The screen lit up, grainy footage from a security camera. It showed Sophie, in our driveway, arguing with Beverly. The night of the taser incident. Except this version was edited. They'd cut the start. Removed the part where Beverly drew the taser first. It looked like Sophie was the aggressor. Beverly's voice echoed faintly in the background. "You're not the hero you think you are." Sophie sat back slowly. "This is her counterattack," she said. "She's trying to rewrite the story." I could feel my stomach twist. "What are you gonna do?" She looked at me, eyes cold, calculating. The truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to survive. That evening, she called an emergency meeting. Not at the HOA office, at our house. One by one, neighbors came. Some nervous, some curious, some still unsure what to believe. Sophie stood by the living room window, sunlight spilling across her shoulders. She looked like she was standing on a courtroom floor again. "Everyone's seen Beverly's video by now," she began. A few people nodded reluctantly. "Well," Sophie said, "here's what she didn't show you." She plugged in her laptop. The screen flashed and the full footage played. From the moment Beverly stepped out, to the second the taser cracked against Sophie's side. No edits, no lies. Gasps filled the room. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" Another whispered, "She set her up." When it ended, Sophie turned off the screen and said softly, "Truth takes time, but it always wins." For the first time in weeks, people clapped. But just when things started feeling right again, someone knocked on the door. Hard. I opened it and froze. It was Beverly. She looked nothing like before. Her hair was a mess, makeup smeared, eyes bloodshot, like someone who hadn't slept in days. She smiled faintly. "Miss me?" Sophie didn't flinch. "Why are you here, Beverly?" Beverly stepped inside uninvited. "You think you've won," she said. "But you don't understand the game." Sophie folded her arms. "I understand enough. You broke laws. You abused people. You stole from the community." Beverly laughed. Sharp, cold, unhinged. "Please, you think they care about laws? You think they care about you? The moment this is over, they'll turn on you too." Her eyes darted around the room. "You're just a show for them. The angry sister, the fearless lawyer, the hero. But heroes don't survive suburbs like this." For a second, I thought she was right. There was something broken in this neighborhood. Something deep. Something that made people enjoy watching the chaos more than stopping it. But Sophie just smiled. "Maybe I don't survive," she said. "But the truth will." Then, almost on cue, headlights appeared outside. 2 black SUVs pulled up. Men in suits stepped out. "District Attorney's Office," one of them said, flashing a badge. "Beverly Myers, you're under arrest for embezzlement, falsifying records, and criminal harassment." The look on Beverly's face, I'll never forget it. The smirk died. Her hands trembled. And as they cuffed her, she glared at Sophie. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You can't kill a system that's built to protect itself." Sophie didn't respond. She just watched her leave. Silent, victorious, broken but unbowed. For the next few weeks, life went quiet again. The kind of quiet that feels earned. The HOA meetings were suspended. An interim board was appointed. And people actually started talking again like real neighbors. Sophie returned to her law office. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled without forcing it. But one afternoon, while sorting mail, she stopped suddenly. She was holding an envelope. No return address. Inside was a small photo. It was Beverly, sitting in a jail cell, smiling, and written on the back, in red ink, "HOA never dies." Sophie stared at it for a long moment. Then she slipped it into a folder labeled Evidence. Pending. I watched her close the drawer, and for a brief second, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not anger, something colder. Resolve. That night we sat outside. The neighborhood was calm. Kids played on the sidewalk again. Sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns. Sophie leaned back and said, "People think HOAs are just about lawns and fences. But they're not. They're about power, and power doesn't vanish. It just waits for the next nameplate." I nodded, because she was right. Beverly was gone. But someone, someday, would take her place. And when that day came, Sophie would be ready. If you finally took down someone like Beverly and got that message, "HOA never dies," would you walk away for good or stay to make sure it never rises again? Comment below, backhand index pointing down. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My sister, lying on the driveway, barely catching her breath after that brutal taser shock. And yet, there was something in her eyes, that calm, fearless glare that made even the HOA officer freeze. The neighborhood was silent. You could hear the hum of distant lawn mowers, kids playing somewhere down the street, but none of that mattered anymore. All that mattered was what was happening right in front of me. Right here, in our own suburban street. The HOA officer had stepped back, shaking slightly. I noticed how his hands trembled as he held that taser. The same taser that had just made my sister hit the ground. I could almost see the realization dawn on him, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. My sister slowly pushed herself up, using the other woman who had been helping her for support. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, like a predator surveying its territory. Her eyes met his, And for the first time, I saw the fear, pure, unmistakable fear, in the eyes of someone who had thought they were untouchable. "You think you can just shock people over fines?" she said, her voice steady but cutting through the air like a knife. "Do you even know who I am?" The officer's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't realize, until it was too late, that my sister wasn't just anyone in this neighborhood. She was a lawyer feared by courts and HOA boards across the city. And she wasn't afraid to use every ounce of her power against people who tried to bully or harm others. I wanted to step forward, to say something, anything, but I stayed frozen, just watching the scene unfold. Because I knew this wasn't just about fines or HOA power trips anymore. This was about justice. The neighbors, who had been peeking from their windows and porches, started whispering among themselves. Some were shocked, some were curious, but a few, I could tell, were quietly relieved, maybe finally realizing that the HOA couldn't control everything. Not if people stood up like this. My sister stood fully now, brushing herself off. She turned to face the officer squarely. "You're going to write a full apology to me and the people you humiliated over nothing," she said. "And you're going to make sure the HOA knows exactly what kind of behavior is unacceptable. Or I promise, your little authority here will disappear overnight." He swallowed hard. I could see him weighing his options, and clearly realizing there was no way out without looking completely pathetic. Then something incredible happened. My sister looked at me, and the corner of her mouth curved into that smirk I know so well, the one that always signals trouble for anyone foolish enough to cross her. "And by the way, any legal action you take against us now will backfire spectacularly," she said. "Because I know all the loopholes, and I always win." The officer's knees buckled slightly. He muttered something under his breath, but it was drowned out by the neighbors now coming out into the street. Some clapped quietly, others shook their heads, all of them realizing that the days of HOA tyranny in this neighborhood might finally be over. I felt a wave of relief and pride wash over me. My sister had not just survived. She had dominated. She had taken a moment that could have been humiliating and turned it into a lesson about power, fear, and respect. Later, when the paperwork was done and the officer had slinked away, my sister and I sat on the porch, catching our breath. I looked at her and realized something. People might fear her reputation, but it was her fearless heart that made her unstoppable. "You okay?" I asked. She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Better than okay. I feel free," she said. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Only you could turn getting tasered into a victory." She grinned, eyes sparkling with that dangerous mix of charm and dominance. "Welcome to our world," she said, "where HOAs learn the hard way." I looked out at the street, now quiet again, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The fight had ended, the HOA's little reign of terror had been challenged, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like justice had actually been served. And I knew, deep down, that anyone foolish enough to cross us would never forget it. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have stood up like my sister, or let the HOA get away with it? Comment below. I want to know how far you'd go to protect your family and your rights. Comment below. I want to know how far you'd go to protect your family and your rights.